Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome back to another Demystifying Post-Production Motion Monday. My name's Ellie, and I'm joined once again by two very special guests, Dustin Valcomer and Ian Robinson. How's it going, guys? Happy Monday.
Happy
Amazing.
Monday.
Happy Monday, everyone.
Yeah, happy Monday. It's doing well. I'm good. How'd you guys' weekend? Good?
It was
Yeah,
amazing.
good weekend. Yeah, yours?
It's good. Yeah, no complaints. It's happy. Gonna do some ZBrushing. I'm good. Let's go.
I am excited. Also, hey to everyone who has already said hi in the questions area. So hey to Hannah, Jim, James, Charles, Drake, Matthias. Thanks for being here live with us. It's good to see you all. So before I hand over to Ian, before we get involved in learning some more ZBrush, I thought I'd talk to you about some of the other events and live sessions we have going on at Maxon. So if you head over to the maxon.net events page, which is this page here, you can see all of the live sessions, webinars, and events that we have coming up as a whole Maxon collective. So we have our normal live webinars that happen every single week. So we have Demystifying Post-Production, which is today and every Monday. We also have Ask the Trainer and Maxon Color, which are alternate Thursdays. And then we also have VFX and Chill with Seth and Hashi. But we don't just do live webinars. We now are starting to do more live shows. So Jonas is actually headed over to India for Broadcast India, where he's going to be showcasing all of the different Maxon projects in an amazing animation that he's created. We also have Lightbox Expo, Adobe Max, NAB New York, a whole variety of things going on. October is like, it's webinar month, it's event month, we've got loads going on. And all of these sessions, they get recorded, they get uploaded onto the Maxon Training Team YouTube channel. Some get live streamed on the 3D Motion Show, some also get live streamed on our YouTube channel, which is this one here. So you can see the live streams that we have coming up, things like Ask the Trainer and Maxon Color, which you can switch on notifications for. We also have the recent uploads and a bunch of different playlists. So in case you ever miss any of these sessions, all you have to do, or if you want to learn something new, head over to this YouTube channel and you can dive into a bunch of new things in all of the Maxon tools. Also, because this is ZBrush month, we also thought we'd talk about pixelogic.com/ZBrush Live, where the amazing ZBrush artists actually stream multiple times a day. So I would seriously recommend, if you're enjoying this series and enjoying sort of what Ian is showing us, then head over to that website and definitely check out some of those live streams as well. Also, we love to say thank you to you guys for coming to watch us and being part of our live sessions by giving away free Maxon t-shirts. All you have to do is pay for shipping, which will vary depending on where you are. And all of these links, including the special merch link and the password to get access to that free t-shirt, can be found in the handout section of GoToWebinar. If you can't see that for some reason, or you can't access any of those links, just let us know. Me and Dustin are here in the background to answer all these questions and drop any of the links for you. So I wanted to go through that super quick because we only have an hour to learn all this amazing stuff, and last week was so great that I'm really excited to dive in again. So Ian, what are we going to be covering over this week?
Okay, so today we're going to be covering some hard surface, intro to hard surface. We'll go over a little bit of what we covered last week with getting started with ZBrush and just bringing in a primitive shape and start sculpting. But I wanted to cover some hard surface because there's a lot of knowledge there and some really fun ways to approach how to do something pretty quickly. So while even if you have like an overextensive or you're brand new to box modeling in general, ZBrush does model hard surface just a little bit differently, but it's a lot of fun. So we're going to cover that today primarily. And I'll show you too when we start, when I share my screen, the project again that we're going to be building. So there's a lot of really fun stuff. It's very much a follow along, learn by doing. So I'm really excited to show it off, but that's going to be the focus today.
Awesome.
Cool. Then shall I throw it over to you and we can get into what we're going to be doing?
Yeah, let's do it. I'm excited. Let's go.
And yeah, we were sort of chatting just before the stream started, and Ian was saying how a bunch of you have been creating the pumpkin from last week, and that is so great. We love to see that. I actually made it myself, believe it or not, because I'm also learning ZBrush along with you all.
We may have to show it at the end of the stream. Stay tuned. Hang out.
I'll be happy to. It is not that great, but we can.
Perfect. Okay, can everybody see my screen? Make sure it's up.
Yes.
Perfect.
We can.
Sweet. Well, then I'm gonna hide my face so we can see all the beauty that is the UI of ZBrush. And then let's go ahead and get into it. So again, this is the project that we're going to be building. There's a lot of fun stuff over the next few weeks that we're going to be covering as well. But today, what I would like to do is focus on making this tombstone. And what's really cool about this is that this is hard surface, and we also have this little feature called live Boolean. So we're going to kind of just start showing the tools like before, and then we'll just kind of build this along as I showcase the tool. We'll also be working with subdivisions today just to go ahead and generate some details. Everything that you'll need ships with ZBrush, so we're not going to be bringing in any third-party tools or brushes. However, there are a lot of really cool stuff if you guys would like to have some really good like rock texture. There is a it's called Orbs Brush. If you just Google Orbs Brush, or I can find a link at the end. It's actually really, really cool. Let's go ahead and get into it. First things first is to start a project in ZBrush. There's two ways to go about doing it, just like we did last week. You can, when you load up ZBrush, you usually get this light box that shows up here in the beginning. And if we focus on this default project, double tapping this will open up a brand new project. So you would double tap it, and then you would just go ahead and say, no, don't save changes unless you're working on something, of course. And that will start you in sculpting already. You can already just start working on this like before. The other way is that if you have nothing on the screen, something like this, and this is how your ZBrush loaded up, but you would like to bring in, let's say maybe a cube because we're making something that's a little bit more squared, not round, then we'll go ahead and hit come on the keyboard or hit this light box button to close that off. And then you'll come on over here, and typically you'll see this simple brush shape right here, this little S shape. You'll just click this one time, and then you'll go ahead and grab the primitive of your choice. In this case, we're going to grab a cube 3D. I'm going to go ahead and left click and drag that out into our open space. And remember, if you drag out multiple items, ZBrush automatically opens up in what's called 2.5D mode. This is a painting program with depth projection. It's kind of the secret of how ZBrush works. So if you absolutely forget and you have all these out, and you're like, oh man, I don't know what to do, just go ahead and hit Control-N if you're on PC or Command-N if you're on Mac, and that clears your screen, and you just drag it out one more time. And then you come on up to the top and hit this Edit button, or you hit T on the keyboard, and then you come on over and say Make Polymesh 3D, and that gets you into sculpting mode, and now we can sculpt on our shape. So those are the two ways to kind of start up. Now today we're going to be focusing on hard surface like I was talking about. So there is a tool in which we want to utilize, and that is ZModeler. So over here on the left-hand side where it says brush, this is our brush palette, and this is probably about 60% of the brushes ZBrush ships with. And where we want to focus today is down here at the bottom where it says ZModeler. And if you hit Z on your keyboard, that actually narrows the brushes down to every brush that starts with the letter Z. And then you can see that there are little icons in which, oops, let me put this up real quick, BZ, little icons that actually have a little letter, might be a little hard to see, but it's little M, that's the secondary shortcut for it. So if you hear me say, okay, we're going to open up our brush, B, C, and then B, that's clay buildup. You hear that a lot in the ZBrush community, so just know that B opens up your brush. The first letter you type after that is going to narrow down your brushes, and then the final letter is going to be your final brush, so that's B, Z, M. Hopefully that's not too confusing, but you get used to it pretty quick. So right now we have our cube, and we're going to turn on the wireframe, because the wireframe is kind of going to basically be the thing that we need to really guide how we model. So we can do that one of two ways. We can hit Shift F to then open up our wireframe so we can see what's going on, or we can come on down here to this button that says Poly F or Polyframe, and you can turn this on or off. Now there are poly groups and edge loops that showcase at the same time, and under that same button, you see we have two little buttons. We have line and fill. These are sub buttons, and you can turn off your poly groups or turn off your lines if you want. You don't have to worry about that too much. I just want you to be aware that that's there, just in case you're like, oh, I don't like the color, I just want to turn that off. You can definitely do that. But right now we're going to go ahead and leave it default, and now we have our poly frames and our everything showcasing. So now with ZModeler, ZModeler is really interesting because basically your edge loops, your faces, and your vertices or points, those are all active at the exact same time. So I can manipulate a face, an edge, or I can even manipulate a point all at the same time under the same brush. But there's a hidden menu, which is really cool, and that's the space bar, and it's going to be your best friend with the ZModeler. If you hover over a face, press and hold space bar, you actually will get all of these options. And now while this might seem a little scary, don't worry. The thing is that you want to look at this as a hierarchy menu. So at the top box right here, we actually have the main function. If you want to bevel something, or you want to bridge or extrude or inset or even insert or move, this all right here, you hover over the space bar, this is going to go ahead and generate the main action. Underneath that menu is the target action. So what is the purpose of the main menu doing? So for example, let's say I want a QMesh. Right now it's telling me with QMesh, I'm doing a single poly. So if I hover over this face and then drag this out, it's only going to affect the single poly that I choose. However, if I'm hovering over that face and say, well, I want to affect all poly groups, so I'll click that. Then when I click this, now everything is affected. Control Z also works. And in point 2, if I want to say like, okay, everything that's front facing, so facing front all, I'm going to affect those, and it's going to do that. So you have these different points. This is just kind of giving you some more options to fine tune the effect that you're going for. And then lastly, at the bottom, it's like QMesh polygroup all. Again, you have a third menu, sometimes a fourth menu, to just kind of fine tune that. There's a lot of that you can basically come in here and study. I don't want to, sit here and like bore you with the super technicalities. I just recommend, kind of following along a little bit today, but also don't be afraid to click something and be like, well, what does the line full and multi-sides do? Like, no, okay, if that's not the effect, just kind of play around with it. If you end up going through this and you make a lot of different selections and you have no idea what's happening, then what you can do is open up that brush menu, and then down at the bottom, there is a reset all brushes. And if you click this, it's going to go ahead and reset the entire setting of the ZModeler brush so that it's all back to the way it originally shaped. So don't be afraid to come in here and play, because you can always just reset your brush and try again. So the same thing if I hover over an edge and press and hold the space bar, it's going to give me the main action at the top. And you'll know which one you're on because the ZModeler will say ZModeler, and then it'll say edge actions or point action or polygon action. So if you're not sure, if you're like hovering around and you click something, you're like, oh, wait, was that the face or the edge? It will say edge actions at the top, so you'll know exactly what's going on. So that's the basic coverage of ZModeler. And what we're going to do is manipulate this cube or set our scene up to go ahead and start using this brush. So I'm going to be showing you real quickly how to make something really fun. So before I go forward, are there any questions before we start making the tombstone? A lot might clear up in the time that we start making that.
Yeah, so we did have a quick one from Chad. Hey, Chad, wondering about the sort of the tools that you already have in the tool panel. So could you explain what the squares are on the tools panel? Is it a history of presets or?
No, that's a great question. So over here on the tool panel, I'm going to go ahead and actually just kind of clear this up real quick. I'm going to just hide this for a minute. So in the tool panel right here, think of these as individual canvases or separate canvases. So right now, this is the one that I had where I was working on this. But at any point in time, if I have another project that I'm working on simultaneously, I could just switch to that canvas by clicking one of these things over here and saying, oh yeah, I have something over here as a cylinder and I was modeling. Whee, fun little model, great, looking beautiful. And now from here, I need to switch back to my Tombstone and I need to focus on that, but then I'm going to need to come back and work on this asset. So think of these as canvases which you can actually bounce back and forth to. And you can have a lot up here. When we bring in our tools for the first time, like we did this morning where I clicked here and I did this star, for example, then I hit edit mode, it's going to generate the object or the subtool with 2.5D menu options. And then when I say make polymesh 3D, it's going to make a 3D option. So now I have two canvases. One's in 2.5D, which I can use that feature if I would like, or I have the 3D feature. So you'll notice here that there'll be some things that generate. However, go a little bit deeper, is that we can get rid of these at any point in time if we're not using them. So I can hover over this face and say, well, I don't need this anymore. So I can go under my subtool menu, which is what we call objects, and I can come to delete all. And this will delete all of the subtools within this canvas, including the canvas itself. Now do be careful, like we said last week, if you are going to hit the delete button, it pops up this warning as an undoable operation. So if you delete it, it's gone forever. So make sure that you save that project. I go ahead and say, okay, now that canvas is gone and we're now left with just the base sphere and we can go back to whatever shapes we were working on. Great question.
Cool, thanks. Another quick one from Alex. Will this be applicable with ZBrush Core Mini? I presume this means like today's session.
Oh, no. So ZBrush Core Mini is primarily just the program that gets your feet wet with how ZBrush functions as a sculpting program. There is no hard surface capabilities within ZBrush Core Mini at this time.
Perfect, thanks.
Yep. Okay, so let's move forward with our Z modeling. So, real quick, we are using the current version of ZBrush, which is 2022.0.6, just in case anybody would like to know. So there are a couple real cool stuff when we're modeling, when we're hard surfacing. Notice that this cube has a pole here at the top. This is my least favorite cube. It holds a special place in my heart for other reasons, but for this, not particular. So I actually want to change this to be a fully quadded cube. So we could do this one of two ways. I want to introduce both because it's also going to introduce some fun options. The first one is to initialize. So if I close the subtool menu and I come down to the bottom and I focus on initialize, this is actually a menu that allows us to manipulate a shape really quickly. I can get a Q sphere, I can get a Q cube, or I can get a Q grid, or even Q cylinders. And you can basically take any shape and manipulate it to these base shapes here. And the reason why this is important is because, especially when you're doing, box modeling, or you're trying to generate a shape with full control, we want to have our mesh be as good as we can out the gate. We don't want to have to retopo it if we're already building it from scratch. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Q cube, and now if we take a look, you can see that I have full quads all the way around. So this mesh is really clean and super fun to work with. So this would be a good starting spot. That's the first way. The second way is if I hit W on my keyboard, like last week, we brought up the gizmo and how we can manipulate and move our shapes. Well, what's really cool about it is here we have a little cog icon at the very top. And if I click this one time, I have some transformer type primitives I can actually switch to. And if I click this polycube, you can see here that I actually have a cube with all of the perfect quads on it. But what's neat about this is that we also have these little blue, green, and red cones. And this allows me to divide or subtract any of the shapes I want. So I can create some really custom shapes. I can go super basic, or I could say, well, I need, 4 up and I need 17 down. So I can actually manipulate the shape this way if I would like to. For this, I'm actually going to go ahead and utilize this cube, and I'm going to just go ahead and say I want just the one on the red cone, or the x-axis, because x is going to be screwing in left to screen right. And then the rest will just stay the way it is. And then I can go ahead and hit this cogwheel one more time and go back to the gizmo. And you'll notice that this is now orange. This means that we're using a deformer and that it's still editable. At any point in time, we can come up and go back to that polycube shape and start manipulating that again. But when we do that, we will, if we make a weird change, like let's say we like squeeze this down and push this up, then I come back and say, oh, I wanted some edge loops on the y-axis. When I go ahead and start adjusting that, it's going to go ahead and snap back to those changes. So we want to make sure that we start with the changes that we want. And here, this is going to be one edge loop in the middle, so that it gives us symmetry, true symmetry. And then, of course, everything else is secondary. We can manipulate that later. So I'm going to go ahead and hit this cogwheel, go back to Gizmo 3D. And now I'm going to go ahead and just with the blue, the blue arrow on the z-axis, I'm going to go ahead and actually just scale this in. And I'm going to get my base shape for my tombstone. And we'll do that the same thing here on the red. And then the rest is going to be ZModeler. So we can go ahead and hit Q to close that gizmo out. And then we'll hit B for brush, Z for ZModeler, and then M for modeler brush. And now we have our ZModeler brush. And we are good to start manipulating this. Now let's go ahead and do the thing that I always forget to do, which is save. So I'm going to go ahead and come up to the top right-hand side of the tool, hit save as, and like we talked about last week, this is going to save as a ZBrush tool file, not a project file. And this way I like to save because it's going to basically showcase that I want to save my project, but I don't want to save everything else, including history. And we'll call this our tombstone build or blockout, whichever. And then we'll go ahead and hit save. And now that's going to go ahead and save for us. And now at any point in time, we can come back to this. So now ZModeler. ZModeler is super fun. To get a basic shape, I'm going to show you how to get the basic shape of a tombstone quickly, and then I'm going to go ahead and like maybe take a few questions and go through it. But one of the things to note is that ZModeler is just something that was built to basically block stuff out very quickly. So for example, I want a rounded top here. So I'm actually going to hover over this polyframe, and notice that on this face that I'm actually getting this kind of orange line. And this is actually indicating the direction in which this brush is functioning. So if I hover over here and I go ahead and say I'm going to want to bridge from this point, it's actually going to bridge starting from that arrow, so it'll be facing that way. But if I would like to bridge, let's say these 2 points together, so I'm going to go ahead and hover over the face, press the space bar and say bridge. Connected polys, that's what I would like. So we're not even going to mess with these down here. We'll pretend they don't exist for now. I'm going to go ahead and left click one time, and I'm going to start being able to pull a shape out. Now what's cool is if I move left to right with my mouse or pen, that's actually going to go ahead and start bringing up the size of it. And if I go up and down, it's actually going to, on the fly, generate how much resolution I have. So I can go really, really low, or I can go really high, which is up to you. But we're going to pick something like a middle ground, say something like that. And we're going to zoom out so you can see this. So that's our base shape. I'm going to do that one more time. And by the way, I tend to use a mouse when I ZModeler. That's just my preference, but you can use a pen for this as well. So we're going to hover over the face that we want to manipulate one more time. We're going to see the orange arrow facing the direction we want to bridge. We're going to go ahead and press and hold left mouse one time. I'm going to go and start moving to the right, and then I'm going to move up to get some resolution and then let go, and that's going to give me my shape. And I'm already having some sort of tombstone shape at this point. And now when we do, and you'll notice this a lot with ZBrush, especially the way I work with hard surface, is that I use the ZModeler and the gizmo quite a lot together, because what we can do is, if you remember from last week, if I press and hold Control, notice my brush at the top here changes to a masking brush, and it defaults at the mask pen brush, which is perfect. So I can actually get a base shape that I want, let's say something like this, press and hold Control, and I can mask out this bottom edge loop. And the way ZBrush masking works, it's like infinite depth. So I can go ahead and select this bottom loop, let go, and it's going to select the entire loop. If I press and hold Control and left click one time in this empty space, that's going to go ahead and invert it. Now I can hit W to bring the gizmo up, and I can start manipulating that edge loop. I can scale it if I wanted to. I can rotate it. It's completely up to you. So here, I'm just going to use it to go ahead and reposition how tall I want this to be, and that's looking pretty good. So then I can clear that mask by pressing and holding Control and dragging out one time. And then we hide the gizmo by hitting Q. So we can, as you can already see, we're already getting the base shape of our tombstone. Any questions so far?
Yeah, so we had a couple. Could you quickly just show Kelly how you got to the or how you reset the ZModeler brush, please?
Absolutely. So go to the brush, open up your brush palette here on the left-hand side, and down at the very bottom, on the right-hand side of that menu, you'll see a reset all brushes. So I can go ahead and click this one time, and then that's going to go ahead and reset all brushes. So while you're playing, that's a way to go ahead and reset that. Now that will reset, if you've loaded in brushes, that will also reset your brushes that have loaded in. It will remove those brushes, but that's okay for right now, because usually it gets kind of crowded in there. So, but if that's the case, like I said, you can just come through here, hit reset all, and then what that will do is if I go back to my ZModeler brush, by hitting B, Z, and then M, and then pressing and holding the space bar, you'll notice here that everything kind of reset. So, and by default, most of this will be, the face will be QMesh with a poly loop. On the edge, it will be insert with a single loop, and on a point, it'll default to move by brush radius. So those will be your defaults, and that's how you'll know.
Perfect. Charles was wondering, is there a way to make edge loop selection more obvious?
Edge looped options more obvious. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, Charles, let us know what, yeah, exactly by more obvious you mean, and we can let you know.
Okay, cool. What I can say is notice as you're hovering over your edge loops, your edge loop will showcase white when you're hovering over it. So when you press and hold the space bar, you'll know that that's what you're selecting, because at the top it'll say edge loops actions. But if you mean like that's a little too faint and you would like to see the edge loops a little bit better, you can go up to preferences, and if I remember right, give me 1 second.
Yeah, so he's also said, just if this helps, how you can visually tell when an edge loop has been selected. I don't see the visual difference after the mask selection. So I hope that helps. Thanks, Charles.
Gotcha. So what you can do is go to preferences, draw, and you can actually increase your polyframe, giving you some darker lines for that. I'm sorry, Ellie, can you repeat what he had said, just so I make sure I heard it right?
Yeah, sure. So how can you visually tell when the edge loop has been selected? I don't see a visual difference after the mask selection.
Gotcha, yeah. So it'll be a little bit more obvious when you have more edge loops. So real quick, if I come here and I select this one, it will seem a little bit more obvious based on how many edge loops you have. When you are working really low and you mask out, masking, it looks really gradient right now. So when you get this low and you control tap, unless you have a lot of edge loops, it may not look like it's selected. So you will have to kind of just be a little bit more purposeful. So when I make this selection here, I know I selected that and I know I inverted that. This gets a little darker. What you could do as well is you could work with color, but like I said, the more edge loops that are there to support the mask, the more obvious it becomes. You could also work with, a darker material as such, so then it gives you a little bit more selection, but there's no way to really manipulate that within ZBrush that I'm aware of.
No, that's perfect, thanks. And one more quick one, which I think is a great question from Joseph, is when does it matter if it's not quads anymore. So I know we talked a lot about sort of like quad topology last week, and we talk about that a lot in C4D. So here we have our triangles we can see. So when does it not matter if it's not quads in this instance?
So it really, like, from my experience, it's going to depend on your workflow and your pipeline in general. If it's something that I fall in the rule of, if it doesn't get animated, triangles are usually okay because it's not moving, it's not deforming. Whereas if it is animating, then quads tend to deform a little bit better. However, I always defer to the pipeline in which you're going. When you're shaping a hard surface object like this, I personally don't really care if there's a triangle in there as long as it doesn't hinder my sculpting or hinder the overall shape of the object. However, again, that's going to greatly depend on what it is you're trying to achieve. For this, it's not going to matter. Our topology can look completely trash and it doesn't matter. The point here would be to just make sure that we have a good shape. Sometimes it can't be avoided in my experience. So here I'm having, this is all triangles at the top coming to a point. It's fine for what we're doing. It's not going to matter too much.
Cool. You heard it here first. Topology can be trash. Mine normally is.
You know it.
Did we already answer the question about the Q? So there's the prefix Q all over the interface. This is from Chad. Does this stand for something? Am I wrong in thinking that we're talking about the base primitives for the ZModeler? Is that just stand for quads?
Yes. I'm pretty sure it stands for quads. Yes.
I didn't want to answer that question and be completely wrong, but that was my thought.
Yep. That stands.
Just say it with confidence, Dustin.
Yes.
Hey, you know what?
Yep. Absolutely.
I'll just sit back in my quiet corner here a minute.
Perfect. Yeah. So, perfect. Great questions. Love it. So let's move forward a little bit so that we get our nice tombstone shape. So as you can see here, we have some nice dark edge loops. So we're going to go ahead and actually create the base shape. And what's going to be really fun is I want to introduce a few ways to select very specific faces, and also too how we have this thing called group by normals. It's very common in ZBrush. So I'm going to cover first how we can use ZModeler to select these faces and then manipulate them to our advantage. And then I'm also going to showcase a group by normals technique, which helps a lot with ZModeler, especially since as we go through, sometimes our colors can get a little interesting, and you might see that like already we have 3 different polygroups here. You can use polygroups to your advantage. So the first way to go about editing your faces or very specific geometry is to hover over a face, press and hold Alt, and click one time, and that's going to go ahead and select these different faces. Now, you can also click, press and hold Alt, left click and hold and drag, and that will do a quick selection as well. But you're going to be definitely using both, especially like, let's say we wanted to manipulate the top here and I only wanted to manipulate these top purple ones. I can then select those and then drag those out. And then I could say, oh, I want to do that a couple more times. Now I want to drag these out. So it's really helpful to press and hold Alt and either click one time or click and drag to go ahead and select those faces. Now, if they show white, this is our temporary polygroup selection. It's rare that you'll ever see white as a polygroup because this tells ZModeler that this is now temporarily a different color. By pressing click at one time, it's going to default to the last color I had selected. But if I'm wanting to have this purple become a different color as I'm dragging it out, I can press Alt once and change the polygroup colors. And polygroup colors, again, are really crucial with ZModeler because they allow us to manipulate things relatively quickly however we want, and we want to make sure that we don't accidentally grab something that we didn't mean to. So like these, so like let's say I have these here, drag these out, now this is a different color and I want to drag it out again. If I had this set to polygroup all, it's going to affect everything I've done before. and sometimes that's going to be a little problematic. So we want to make sure that we can select the things that we want, and Alt tap and that temporary selection is our answer for that. So that's going to make our lives a lot easier. And that's going to help us here, because what we can do is we can press and hold Alt. We can go ahead and select just these front faces. We can press and hold the space bar, and we can say we want to inset all of these polygroups, and we can click one time and we can try to drag this out. Now I'm getting this kind of funky dunky stuff happening here. So let me make sure, yep, we have our culprit, which is right here, these little edge loops. Let's go ahead and delete that edge loop. Oh, that was actually a supporting edge loop, so let's leave that there. And now we can drag that out, and that can give us our base shape here, which then we can continue. So that's one way of going about that. So I'll go over that one more time. So we can go ahead and select by pressing Alt and dragging. We can go ahead and get all of our edge loops, and then we can come on out and drag. Now, the reason why I showcase this first is because notice how here in the middle, we have these groups here. Well, we don't want to be spending our time zooming all the way in, making sure every single edge loop is selected, when we can actually make sure that this whole front facing panel is one poly group, and we can do that with the click of a button. And that is going to lead us to our group by normal. So if we come on over to our menu on the right hand side and open up our polygroups menu, which is right in the middle, you'll notice we have quite a lot of options. The one we're going to focus on today is grouped by normals. And I think I might have touched base on auto groups last week. And if I didn't, auto groups would be the secondary most commonly used button. And that is because if I click this with multiple groups, which I'll showcase real quick, like I got these guys right here. If I say auto groups, it's going to go ahead and group every non-connected or merged item into its own poly group. So that's what auto groups will do. What groups of normal will do is based on the angle here, which is defaulted to 45-degree angle from one face to another. If I say group by normals, now it's going to go ahead and take that angle into account and select all of those normals to its own poly group. So notice here I have green in the back, kind of blue in the front, little turquoise at the bottom, and then this nice little kind of magenta on top. So these right here are now different. So now I can actually select that face and do a inset if I would like to. I could also hover over this face and maybe create my own little edge loops as well. This is usually typically defaulted to edge loop, and I can do it like this if I wanted to as well. So it depends, but for here, we're gonna go ahead and do inset, which is gonna go ahead and give us a nice face like that. And now we can use this to go ahead and press and hold spacebar on the face, choose QMesh with polygroup all, and we're gonna push these in, giving us this kind of nice little edge to it, little lip to it. That's right there is polygroups. Yay. Any questions? I know this is a lot. I can throw so much fast. I don't want to throw too much at once.
No, it's all good. No, none at the moment.
Sweet, awesome. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to back up a little bit because I want to show you a trick with Inset. And the trick with Inset is if we go ahead and hover over that face, press and hold the space bar, go to Inset, down here at the very bottom is a custom snap. And we're going to actually take the slider and drag this all the way up to 0.25. It's defaulted as, I think, like 0.03 or something really low. And as you notice, as I'm dragging, some of these edge loops are starting to split a little bit. And now if we don't care about topology at all because we're just getting a 3D printed or something, then no big deal. But let's say we do want to have that be a little bit cleaner, we can actually come down here to the bottom and slide the slider all the way up. And then that sometimes will help generate a little bit more mesh. Now, sometimes you'll notice when you're ZModeling that depending on how your mesh is, you know, there might be a little bit of cleanup. Here, we're not going to worry about that too much today because we don't want to hyper focus on things, especially if it's not going to get animated. We said earlier, topology is not a big deal here for right now, but it is something to be aware of on how some things function. So the other way we can do, like let's say we wanted this to be a super clean mesh, and that's what I'm going to focus on right now. We're going to focus on the edge itself. I'm going to go insert single, and I'm just going to go ahead and maybe create my own edge loop for that lip. And then I'll use that Alt technique to then come here with QMesh and push this in. Now, I did this on purpose because I do want to showcase something really cool with QMesh, and that is this ability to kind of delete or to snap mesh to something else, which is the next fun spot. So with QMesh, and the reason why I'm pushing QMesh, because we do have an extrude function. If we hover over and we press and hold, we have extrude, we can extrude out, no problem. But extrude acts as an independent extrusion of its own, so it won't snap to anything that we may or may not have. It may not snap to another edge, So with QMesh, that automatically happens. So we press and hold here, and we go to QMesh, and let's just do a couple of these like this. Notice I have this edge loop here. This edge loop, I would like to have this face snap to it. And notice how like I'm actually able to kind of drag and get that kind of snap effect happening. I'm going to go ahead and give it a different polygroup by pressing Alt one time, and then I can do that again. So you can get some nice edge flow happening this way and get some really nice angles as well. So this is where QMesh kind of lives and has its strengths, because then we said you can add in different maybe abilities, like let's say maybe I want this to look like a certain way, and then I would like this one to maybe snap up to this one and have that. So you can create custom shapes quickly with QMesh, but you can also completely get rid of a specific edge loop if the geometry is matching from the front to the back. So I can create a hole right here in the middle by clicking this. Notice the geometry is exactly the same. QMesh all the way through, and now I've generated a hole right in the middle. And so this can be really, really helpful for creating nice, intricate shapes quickly with QMesh. So with that in mind, again, we can come through here and we can say, I'm going to Control Z. I'm going to add in an edge loop right here because this is the depth that I'm going to want this to be. Go ahead and say, yep. That warning came up because I Control Z'd a lot of history, and it wants to remind me that there's a lot of history that I can go forward in time if I want. And I'm going to go ahead and I am going to isolate this, and I'm going to make sure that these are here. Perfect. Hit F on the keyboard, which will zoom in and out and help frame. And I'm going to push this back. And now I'm going to go ahead and just push this in, and it will kind of force stop a little bit. And it indicates that there's an edge loop there. And now I can have that nice shape right there, giving me my basic tombstone lip. So those are a few ways that you can go about doing it. So you can either have complete control manually, or you can do it really, really quickly, again, by just using that polygroup frame, coming in here and setting, dragging this in, and then coming to QMesh and snapping in. So lots of ways to go about doing that. Cool. So now we're going to move into lettering with live Boolean to get our rip sign, because we all want this tombstone to be built. So we can finesse it or fine tune it later. I'm going to squeeze my tombstone in just a little bit, just because it seems a little fat. So we'll get it looking pretty nice. And now we're going to go ahead and go up to our tool subtool menu. And I'm now going to I'm just going to insert a new object. So I'm going to go ahead and insert, and it doesn't matter. So I'll say my poly star. And now I have this big old star here, and it's not going to really matter right now. I'm just having this as a placeholder so that I know that I'm going to manipulate the text next. For text, bringing in text is really simple and really easy with ZBrush. So if you open up the Zplugin at the very top, and you come on down to text 3D or vector shapes, this is where if you would like to, if you have a custom vector shape, let's say from Illustrator or Photoshop, and you would like to bring it in, or you just want to slap in some text, you can come in here and either load in a vector shape or simply create a new text. Now, before we hit create a new text, I do want to say that we do recognize installed fonts onto your computer. So for this particular project, we're actually going to go down to Times New Roman, as that's a very common font for tombstones. So I'm going to make sure that that's selected. And then I'm going to go ahead and say new text, and it's going to prompt a window. So I'm going to type in rip R period I period P period, and go ahead and hit enter. And now that generates a new object. We're going to go ahead and hide this star real quick. Now I brought in the star because what you could do too, like if you wanted to import an OBJ object, if you import an OBJ object, it's going to overwrite the text, the object you have selected. And so by habit, that's what I tend to do. But you can see here, this actually generated its own text, which is perfectly fine. So it has a new object on the side, which works. So we didn't need the star, which is okay, but good habit to know, especially if you're going to import OBJs. So moving forward, I'm going to turn on the polyframe. Let's get a different material just so you can see this a bit better. Here we go. That might be a bit brighter. So notice here that this is the geometry in which it pops in. We can edit this a little bit. So what I can do is actually go back up to Zplugin, and down at the bottom, we have a few options. We have extrusion, resolution, spacing, beveling. So we can actually go ahead and fine tune this. So I'm going to bring up the extrusion, and notice it actually responds in real time to that change. So I don't have to go back in and say regenerate new text. I can just come through and say, all right, I want that extrusion to be here. And then I do want the resolution to be a little bit better. So it'll give me a little bit better resolution. But because what we're using this for, again, we don't need to have super clean topology because we're just using this as a cutting tool. So now that we have our rip text, let's go ahead and place that. So I'm going to hit W for the gizmo, and I'm going to scale this down, and I'm going to move and position this so that it fits on my tombstone quite where I want it to be. I'm going to go ahead and scale this up, and I can also too come through and select. So I masked out this area by just grabbing this mask, dragging this, pressing holding control and tap to invert, and I can actually position this in a little bit more so it doesn't look so weird. There we go. Now I'm going to want this truly centered, so I'm going to bring up the gizmo with W, press and hold Alt, and this little Google icon, unmask center mesh button, I'm going to press that one time. That's going to recenter that to the subtool, and then I'm going to hit the home button to recenter that to the world center. And then I'm going to reposition it where I want that. So that way I know it's truly in the middle of my object. And I'm going to place that right about there. And now we're going to introduce live Boolean. And live Boolean is so cool, especially for hard surface, because it updates your cuts really quickly. And if you need to edit them, you can do that before you commit it. So I'm actually going to put everything here in a folder. And I can do that by go ahead and select the first item I want. So let's say we'll just do the rip text. And I'm going to press and do Control F to bring up a folder, and we'll type this as our tombstone. And now it generated a folder with our text in there. But we want to put tombstone in there as well. So I can just come up to the subtool, left click that to select it, and then left click and drag that into our folder. So now everything here is in that folder. Now ZBrush will have a hierarchy system by default when you're doing any type of cutting action. You don't need folders to do a cut action because ZBrush has, it might be a little hard to see on the screen, but on our subtool, we have this little arrow. And if we click this arrow one time, it's going to generate a number. And that number is basically anything below the subtool that is calling this subtool as I'm the parent and everything underneath is my child. So this is our hierarchy system. If we had multiple subtools, like if I just go ahead and duplicate this one time, you'll see that there's a number 3 next to that. So I put everything in a folder because it's a little bit cleaner, a little bit neater. So we don't need to do that arrow parents necessarily unless we get super complicated. But for today, we're just going to go ahead and leave everything just within the folder itself. And now what we'll do is we're gonna focus our attention on the item below, the rip text, and we're gonna have some icons here. This first icon is basically a joining icon. It's there to merge things together. It represents two spheres. So if we were to merge this folder together, that's gonna merge with the object above. Then we have another icon, which is gonna generate the cutting icon. So it'll take this and it's gonna cut against the subtool above it. And then we have another one, which is our intersect, which if we turn on Live Boolean, which you do at the very top left-hand side next to the light box is Live Boolean. You'll notice here that if I select through these menus, we have merge, we have cut, and then we have our union, or our intersect rather. So that's gonna basically take the difference between the two and remove the rest. So very similar to maybe something that you have in Cinema 4D, but for ZBrush, this is the way you'll have to do it, is select which one of these are. Now, the reason why it's called Live Boolean is this isn't a permanent thing. If I open up the gizmo, I can move this text and the cut moves with it. So I don't have to sit here and, guess where that needs to be and then make that cut active. I can literally just be like, oh, I actually want that text to be here. Want to blow that text up, make it even better, and put this right there, boom, rip. Now I have a super stylized tombstone that is gonna give me this shape, and it's gonna cut right where I want it, and I can position. And this will only become permanent when we finally do a merge at the end. But you don't have to when your project is being built. This is all very much happening in real time. And if you go ahead and have your polyframe turned on by hitting Shift F, and you notice this kind of anti-aliasing effect that's happening on the rip subtool, that's a way to let the user know that Live Boolean is active. It is performing a cut or some sort of intersect. And then it also shows you exactly how big that object is, because you can't tell how big that text is just from this Live Boolean text. Does that make sense? Hopefully it does.
Yeah, it does. We've also had a question on this.
Perfect.
So Charles was wondering, this actually came earlier, and so it's kind of good that you've covered Boolean. He was wondering, is there a way to roughen the edges of a Boolean cut by any chance?
To like sculpturally roughen it? Go ahead.
I would presume so, yes. He's not said, but he said sort of like a displacer on a loop selection in C4D. So I would think so.
Yeah, just to create more of like a
clean.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So that's what's really cool about this Live Boolean is that I can actually manipulate this. I can actually manipulate this subtool to, I can sculpt on it in real time. So let me grab this deformer here. So if I were to turn this off for a second, and let's say I had some pretty decent mesh, and I wanted to sculpt on this, and this mesh is actually not really conducive for sculpting. However, what we can do is, let me show a little trick, especially when you have super hard edges like this. What we can do is actually remesh this to make this work in our favor. So I'm going to go ahead and go to Geometry, Z-Remesher. I'm going to say Detect Edges at, let's say, like 20,000 polys, and go ahead and say Z-Remesh. And that's going to go ahead and give me a better mesh. And now I could sculpt on this. So yes, I could come through here, and I actually could start like coming through and maybe texturing or creating a little bit of a cut here and there, just something like that. And then when I turn that Live Boolean back on, you'll notice that that is actually updating as well. All of this can get manipulated on the fly quickly. So you can still sculpt on that geometry. I still can take this mesh right here and move and warp this to be whatever I want. So I can actually have this kind of looking really neat. So while this object is there, yes, you can sculpt, you can manipulate, and you can distort that text however you would like. If I were to even come through, and I was going to go into this a little bit more next week, but there is this thing called surface noise. So under the tool menu, if I go to surface and apply some sort of noise, which I'll do just a little quickly here, but you just come in through here turn on noise, and this brings up a new menu, and I can go ahead and like generate some surface noise that also will update to that object. So as long as that object is actively still projecting a cut of some sort, any manipulation you do to that subtool will correspond to the actual cut itself.
Oh, that's good to know. Thanks. I have a this might be like a C4D users question, but is there any way to change what the text says once you've created it?
So great question, and I will go ahead and showcase. So if I wanted to change the text itself, once you've hit enter to the text, you will have to generate a new text. So you would have to come in here and type in something else, and then that would have to then pop that in as well. So yeah, as far as best of my knowledge, you can't change it on the fly, but once you type it in, any changes you do henceforward will change drastically. So even if it was a font change, like maybe I wanted a different font, but once you say, you have to say new text, and they have to import that text in. They can't change it quickly, or can't
So
change it.
what are the limitations of the edit text?
Right. Oh, yeah, you know what? Let me click this real quick. So the edit text, so I'm going to come through here and say, I'm going to say rip, right? So there you go, actually. Boom, I stand corrected, my fault.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, I was only curious. I didn't want to like call it out, but I was very curious because I've been mentally following along and my brain was breaking.
No, you know what? That is correct. I stand corrected. No, you know what? Let's edit that part out real time. So if you want to edit the text, what you need to do is actually go up to Zplugin and go.
So I re-asked the question.
So you go through here and you say, boom, rip, and yes, you can change it that way. And then you can also change the actual font itself. To be fair, I don't actually do that very often. I'm very specific with my text because I'm not one to go through and just edit. I usually say new text and go through. So yes, that is correct. I stand corrected.
Nice.
I'm not making it.
Wait.
So let's actually back this up in time. As if it never happens. Great question, by the way. Yes.
Dr. Sassy will maybe just cut that. I don't know how to work. No, that's awesome though. Yeah, it's definitely, yeah, I mean, yeah, we understand that so well, the little live bloopers. You know, but I do understand as well, you know, when you get into certain workflows and processes, it gets a bit difficult to like you glaze over some of that stuff. And I do it all the time when I'm teaching things like creative lighting and whatnot. And it's like, oh yeah, actually there is that other tool.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, no, it is funny. I mean, there's just so many ways to go about stuff. And then like for me, I'm super purposeful of just like getting the object in, you know. And it's so yeah, sometimes I just don't even think about it. So it happens. So, okay. And then let's say we actually want to finalize this because we're running out of time and we'd like to go ahead and make this what it is. We're going to go ahead up to the Tombstone and under this folder, now you don't have to close it. I do that by habit, but don't mind me. If you click it one time, it closes. If you click one time, it opens back up. To go ahead and actually do the official change to make this official and have it cut in the way you would like, you click the cogwheel on the folder and then you go ahead and say Boolean that folder. And it will go ahead and generate a new subtool with those changes and the cuts on the fly. Now you'll notice here that the mesh isn't always super beautiful, but again, that's not the purpose of it. Here, we can always, just like we had showcased before, we can go ahead and Z-remesh that as well if we actually need to have super clean topology. For this project, not so much, but you know, it is something that you can do as well to clean up your text and stuff like that. I also meant to hit text edges, there we go. And you can have something pop in like that. So, but that's how you would go ahead and do that. So that's the introduction to hard surface. There was a little bit more I wanted to cover, but this, I'm sure this also feels like a lot as well. So don't want to explode too many heads too quickly, as we'll definitely be doing more of these in the future.
Oh, yeah. Great. That was cool. Cool. Let me just switch my camera back on.
Yeah. Let's switch mine back.
Yeah, again, I'd agree with James. Said these webinars go so fast, and they do, and it's so amazing what you show us, Ian, and great questions from everyone as well. Like I thought they were really, really, really good ones, especially for like sort of beginner users.
Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely.
Yeah. Well, hopefully everybody's enjoying this series. Again, I know ZBrush is very different in the way other programs work, like Cinema 4D. So, but where a lot of this will come into play again is like making your own assets. You know, I can't imagine the time in which, you know, a lot of artists or either they're searching for something that they need when maybe they can just make it themselves. So hopefully this is that nice introduction for them to be like, oh, I can use this tool and make those assets and then bring them back in and continue my workflow instead of spending hours like, where is this one thing? Which I've done a lot, by the way.
Yeah, I feel like we all run into that creatively where we just have assets that we need and we can't find them, especially for background. That's what I've realized I look for the most. It's like that one thing in the background that I need, and maybe I just need a quick silhouette. Yeah, it definitely inspired me to start using ZBrush a bit more.
Absolutely. Well, guys, thank you for having me on. This was super exciting, super fun, and yeah, text, you can't edit it.
No, this was so good again, honestly. Yeah, I'm looking forward to rewatching it like I did last week and building my tombstone to go with my pumpkin. And yeah, and let us know, tag us on socials, tag Ian, so we can see all the great stuff that everyone's been making. And we'll see you next Monday for part 3.
Yay! See you guys next Monday.
Awesome. Bye,
Awesome.
everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.